Hi, it's Leaf. It's been a full decade since the release of one of the best and hands down the most influential cozy sim games of all time, Stardew Valley. It took me honestly years to warm up to the idea of this genre enough to actually give it a go, but once I did, I never stopped. Neither did the developers, because for a decade now, cozy sims have been really popular. Everybody wants to make one. Some try to recreate the classic, simple and relatively cheap approach of Stardew Valley itself, pixel art, chibi sprites, mostly static character portraits and that MIDI style soundtrack. Others go all out with 3D environments, detailed character models, cinematic cutscenes and voice acting. Sometimes we get more story, sometimes less. Some games play like old Harvest Moon, known today as Story of Seasons. Others lean more towards Rune Factory. But the formula, despite some differences, remains the same. Your own plot of land, success earned through the sweat of your brow, simple management, friendship and romance. In other words, a life you can control, where there's a clear connection between your work and your success. If you work hard, you'll get results and recognition. If you spend time with people, they'll like you. In many ways, it's a perfect life, built on simple, clearly defined rules and goals. No wonder so many people love this genre, especially in this day and age. But you know how it is. When something gets popular, suddenly there's a ton of it. And when there's a ton, the quality isn't always consistent. Some cozy sims are lovely and polished, others not quite there yet. Especially since a lot of them are made by small indie studios. Of course, what we consider good or bad is very personal, and sometimes we like something because of its flaws, and sometimes quite the opposite. There are games I just don't vibe with, no matter how polished they look, Coral Island for example, and there are others I'll always have a soft spot for, even though their quality is, all over the place, like Sunhaven. But there's one game that didn't look like much at first, at least to me, and then surprised me in mostly the best possible way. And of course, because it's already in the title, I am talking about Fields of Mistria. I already made a video about it, and honestly, my opinion hasn't changed since then. I loved the game in 2024, and I love it today. And the things I wasn't enthusiastic about back then, I still don't like them. The game hasn't left early access yet, but we're getting there. We usually get 2 major updates a year. The most recent one was in February, and apparently the next one is supposed to bring us version 1.0, so I think it's very likely we'll get the full release in 2026. But what makes Fields of Mistria so special? The early 90s anime-inspired character design is definitely one of the reasons, but most importantly, the writing, the sheer amount and actually natural quality of dialogue. It makes the world feel rich and lived in. One thing I've noticed over the years is that rich, varied dialogue in cozy sims is really rare, which is always a bit disappointing, given it only needs to be written, as there's usually no voice acting, just text. Okay, I know nothing about game dev, and I'm sure it's not so simple, but the fact is that too often there's this sense that something is missing, like the world is only half alive. I always feel it, and it always makes everything a bit too superficial. Most characters in these games have just a handful of lines they repeat every day. Maybe a seasonal variation, maybe a special line for a festival, but that's usually it. And because of that, the characters often feel strangely isolated from each other. They don't really interact unless the game forces them to in a cutscene. Their lives don't overlap in a meaningful way. They exist mostly to talk to you, the player, and sometimes to each other during those scripted heart events, but outside of that, it's quiet. And that's where Fields of Mistria stands out. Sure, the characters aren't radically more complex than usual, they're still basic archetypes, and the dialogue does repeat, but the sheer amount of it makes a huge difference. It feels almost random, like you're catching people mid-thought instead of hearing the same lines on loop. Characters react to what you've done, they comment on your achievements, on events that you've been part of, on things that you talked about before, on things that they've talked about before. They quote-unquote remember. And because they remember, the world feels more reactive, more connected. It's still a cozy sim, but it has this extra layer that most games in this genre just don't bother with. Good writing can elevate even the simplest game, and I don't even mean Shakespeare-level writing. I mean just decent, natural writing, and enough of it. Enough lines, enough reactions, and enough personality for the characters to feel like they exist outside of the player's field of view. Of course, good mechanics are important. I love a cozy sim that can challenge me a bit but also respects my time. Give me crafting from storage, give me an add to existing stacks button, give me clean inventory management. Honestly, every game with crafting should have these by now, not just cozy sims. Quality of life design is a blessing. And Fields of Mistria has a fair amount of it. Mechanically, the game is fine, everything works. But the movement can feel a bit floaty and imprecise at times, and that becomes the most noticeable during area of effect actions like mining, chopping, or watering. Sometimes, even if you're technically facing the right direction, if your cursor or starting point is just slightly off to the side, the game will automatically turn your character and aim the action somewhere else entirely. It's a small thing, but it can be extremely frustrating, especially when you're trying to work quickly or hit a specific tile. But this mostly happens if you change the original setting and zoom the camera out to see more of the map. It definitely helps with navigation, but because every tile becomes smaller, precision becomes harder, so you end up with this trade-off: better visibility, but more misfires. And it also can affect combat, but combat is a separate issue. It's clearly not designed for blindly clicking in the general direction of the enemy. If you do that, your character will travel forward in a combo of 3 moves, and the moment you find yourself standing right next to the enemy, you end up swinging your sword past them. So, panicking is a terrible idea. I called it an issue, but technically it's a design choice. The combat here rewards restraint, timing, special moves, and using the enemy's attacks against them. And that's fine in theory, but when you're being swarmed by 2 or 3 aggressive creatures that can fly over obstacles and reach you in seconds, it's very easy to lose your nerves and, as a consequence, your life. So always carry good food or potions with you. Some enemies can only be defeated by attacking at the perfect moment, and because the in-game days are so short, it's possible to waste a lot of time just waiting for that window. The good news is that if you're really frustrated, you can slow down the passage of time in the settings, but it comes with a warning that the NPC's routines are designed with that original day length in mind. Fortunately for the combat and the player, leveling up your gear and yourself makes a huge difference. So, around mid to late game, you really become a force to be reckoned with. But the early game, yeah, it definitely made me want to break something once or twice. The good thing is that new enemies are introduced gradually and in mostly safe situations. Most of the time you get a chance to look at them, observe their attack patterns and figure out how they move before the game throws you into a situation when there's nothing between you and them. So usually you have plenty of time to prepare. Usually. I'm looking at you, flying books. But all in all, while many cozy sims struggle with combat design, here you can clearly see that a lot of thought went into it. It is annoying at times, in part exactly because of that design, but it feels like it means well. It's trying to be varied, it's trying to be intentional, and for the most part, it succeeds. It's not perfect, and it definitely has moments where you want to scream into a pillow, but you can absolutely tell the system wasn't slapped together as an afterthought. There's structure, there's logic, and there's an attempt to make combat feel like something more than just frantic clicking. And I can absolutely respect that. But since we're talking about annoying things, there is one aspect of this game I genuinely dislike. The main quests. Not the main story, mind you. The main projects, because that's what the quests are. Projects to improve or rebuild parts of the town. They do push the story forward, but more importantly, they push the gameplay forward. They unlock new activities, new recipes, new animals, and new crops. Mechanically, they're hardly the most engaging part of the game, but they do their job. However, the way they're designed, including from a storytelling perspective, is annoying. The early game main missions usually require increasing amounts of building materials and money. And honestly, it's nothing unusual, but in this case, practically every quest expects you to repeat the exact same thing but on a bigger scale, and it's just boring. But the worst part is how it's framed. Every time you get a new quest, it feels like you, and only you, are expected to provide everything. It's not phrased as a shared effort. I mean, it's technically described as a community project, but in reality it's basically, well, the town went over budget. Again, we still need this much wood, this much stone, some additional materials, and this much money. Here's a donation box, fill it. You fill it. I know it's the player who offers to help, but we really have no other choice. And at some point we start feeling like some rich uncle. And at least at first we are definitely not rich. And the required amounts are not small. We're talking hundreds of pieces of wood and stone, plus a few thousand of tesserae straight from your pocket. Money and materials you also need to improve your own farm. But after each quest, you're so exhausted from all that gathering that you'd rather ignore your own farm entirely than chop even one more tree. And most of the time, you're also broke, especially since it's early in the game and you're most likely still struggling to stay afloat. And then, when you finally stop feeling nauseous at the very sight of an axe and get back on your feet financially, and now you could potentially build yourself a coop or a barn, the game hits you with another donation box and you have to fill it all over again. And while all this is happening, the game also expects you to already have at least one barn, because in between fixing and improving the town's buildings, you're also required to restock the food reserves, which at some point means milk, which means cows, which means a barn you probably couldn't afford because you were too busy funding the entire town's infrastructure. So yeah, most of the early game is spent collecting wood and going broke. And the late game doesn't really fix this, it just shifts the grind. Instead of hoarding wood and stone, you start hoarding special void items that appear somewhat randomly in the mines. And of course you never have enough of them, at least some of them, which means endless expeditions into the mines. And after a while, it gets boring once again. Not to mention that the last levels of the mines are locked behind, wait for it, the number of hearts you have with two very specific characters. So even if you don't like them, you have to befriend them. There's no way around it. Their stories are tied to the main plot, so you'll earn some hearts almost automatically. But I still reached the point where I was basically spamming them with loved gifts every day just to push the meter up, instead of, genuinely trying to be nice to them. Seriously, as much as I love this game, it somehow managed to turn a lot of stuff into a grind, including friendship. And yeah, after everything I've just said, it probably sounds like I hate this game, but I do love it. Despite all the grind and all the boring sections, the game really plays very well. It has a lot of charm, it's graceful, and honestly, if you know what you're doing, if you don't rush, if you don't obsess over finishing quests as fast as possible, you can avoid both the grind and the boredom almost entirely. True, things will take a long time if you play that way, but I suppose that's exactly how it's meant to be played. Slowly. Does that align with my temperament? Not really. But honestly, where's the fire? Yes, Fields of Mistria kinda punishes you if you don't play it the way the devs intended. If you change the scale of the screen, the controls get imprecise. If you change the length of the day, the NPC schedules might fall apart. I don't know, I never tried that one. If you rush things, you absolutely burn out because of the grind. You can't even freely choose who you want to befriend because some friendships are mandatory. But at the same time, it's obvious that a lot of thought and effort went into the game's mechanics. In fact, it's probably designed better than many other cozy sims. I admit, I don't love the milky, dull color scheme of the environments. But that's what recoloring mods are for. And honestly, the sweet, detailed NPC designs with their little seasonal outfits and expressive faces more than make up for the simplicity of the landscape. And considering that the co-directors and designers of Fields of Mistria are the same people who created Pusheen, the aesthetics don't surprise me at all. They're very on-brand. It kinda even explains the early 90s anime-inspired character art, and that particular choice actually makes me happy. I don't like pastels, but I do love that soft shoujo style, somewhere between Sailor Moon and Robin Hood. Who still remembers that one? Mechanically, Fields of Mistria is well thought out and decently designed. In fact, as I already mentioned, it's designed better than many cozy sims. But, more importantly, its heart is in the right place. It tries to be universal and welcoming, it mostly avoids being preachy or divisive, and it has a lot of that old school charm. And yes, it's tropey, but honestly, what isn't? I won't deny that the game frustrated me more than once, sometimes to the verge of anger. But if I'm being perfectly honest, I strongly suspect that most of that frustration comes from me, my personality, my impatience, my own way of playing. Despite being a fairly experienced farm sim player, I still forget that frantically chasing the story is not the point of this genre. It's known as cozy for a reason. Cozy sims aren't meant to be sprinted through, they're meant to be relaxing, and I seem to completely ignore that little detail. Fields of Mistria is not some groundbreaking masterpiece of a game, but despite some flaws, it is well made. And it's not ready yet, so things still can be changed and improved. In any case, I can't wait for the full release and more content, but that's gonna be it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I see you in my next video. Take care.